There's a little garage on a small town street. I like to meet my friends there every week, and I know we'll talk about some facts and things, history and science and some crazy shit. Talking it out with Alan, Ben, and Nick, and I know that it's gonna be a weird-ass show. Ooh, insanity abounds. Ooh, the world is spinning round. Now we're gonna break it down. This is Informed and Confused. Thanks for listening. I'm Ben.
I'm Alan.
And I'm Nick.
And this week we are continuing in our two-part World War I discussion of 1914.
The BFW!
Big fucking war!
Every time now.
Last time we got mostly through the diplomacy stuff,
or lack thereof.
or lack thereof, depending on how you want to look at it. The Russians had mobilized. The Germans were scared shitless and decided they needed to mobilize too.
Except that path took them through Paris.
Pretty much, yeah. So the Germans...
The only plan they had in any outbreak of conflict, we're going to Paris.
So knowing that they now have to attack France before they attack the country that they're actually having a problem with, they issue what becomes known as the double ultimatum. They issue one ultimatum to Russia, basically telling them, stop mobilizing or else.
Because they kind of have to.
Right. Because at this point, that's the only way the Germans can avoid doing what they got to do is if the Russians back down. The other one they send to France. And they basically want the French to give them certain assurances that...
Assure us that you are not about to attack us, and we won't attack you.
They're not about to stab us in the back. Huh. While we're fighting the Russians. And they want them to keep their army so far back from the border, to promise not mobilize. And because they know that, again, like with the Austrians and the Serbians, they're planning on attacking the French either way. The ambassador in Paris is given this second document. It's like, all right, if they actually somehow accept this, then tell them we also want them to surrender all their big forts on our border over to us. All their major defensive points for the duration of the war.
Give us your stuff.
They don't have to do that because the French basically say something along the lines of, our response is, we will look after our own interest. Which is basically fuck off.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the polite way to say fuck off.
Which is what they expected. But it just has the weird look of, all right, why all of a sudden you threaten the French? The French haven't actually done anything yet.
Right.
Because,
as I said in the last episode, it was kind of weird as to, wait, why are they attacking France now?
It's this weird situation that only the Germans find themselves in, which nobody else knows or is aware of. Otherwise, the Russians probably wouldn't have mobilized if they knew the Germans were in that position.
Right.
But nobody fucking knows.
Because,
No, they're too busy mounting for an army that's not massing on that border.
Right.
Yeah. So ultimately, they give the Russians the their ultimatum, and there's this, like, I guess you'd call it heartwarming or sad story of when the Russian ambassador or the German ambassador, goes to present the declaration, asks him, do you have an answer? The Russian guy says, sorry, no, we can't. They go back and forth like that a couple of times, making the point that you know what's going to fucking happen if you tell me no, right? Right, dude? And he's like, yeah, but that's it. And then he goes to...
They both understood what was happening, but they both had their position that they could not back down.
And you got to also remember, these guys have known each other for years. They're friends. They don't
right.
want this. So they're so shook up. Like the German ambassador, he's got 2 copies of the Declaration of War, one for if they ignore them and one for if they say no. Because he's so distraught, he hands him both. And at which point they both fall into each other's arms crying. They differ as to who started crying first. They both claim the other one.
No one's allowed to admit to emotion.
Yeah, but they both agree.
Not at that time.
They're men.
Yeah, but they both agree that by the end of it, they're both bawling their eyes out. They then calm down.
It is a sad thing.
Yeah. They then
have to declare war on your friend.
Yeah. They then calm down, exchange some mandatory threats and insults at each other.
Mandatory threats. I love that.
Yeah, or like this is your
I
fault.
prefer
No,
the
it's your fault.
mandatory insults.
Yeah. The whole more blame, I should say. This is your fault.
I am being
no, it's your
told to
fault.
call you a communist pig.
That's later.
Yeah.
Nobody in this is a commie.
Foreshadowing. No. But yeah. So Russia and Germany are now at war. At the same time, they've given the French the ultimatum. That's not happening. The French
So
give them
now
back.
they are at war.
Well, before they declare war on the French, now the timeline here is the double ultimatum is issued on the 1st. It's rejected that same day by the Russians. Germany declares war August 1st on Russia. The following day on August 2nd, two things happen. The Germans occupy Luxembourg, the small nation of Luxembourg, as their armies start moving. And they issue a second ultimatum to Belgium, saying, all right, Belgium, let our armies just pass through to get to the person we're actually
and we're
pissed
not
off.
going to screw with you.
We won't screw with you. We promise to respect your interests after the war. Everything will be fine.
We just need to go through you, and we'd rather not roll over you. We'd rather roll through you.
Yeah. To which the Belgians
Told them to fuck off.
King Albert tells them to screw off and immediately asked Britain and France to
come in on their side to defend.
to help them because
mutual defense treaties.
Yes.
All around.
Or in this case, mutual neutrality treaty. Belgium, since the end of the Napoleonic Wars, since the 1830s, I think, since Belgium has been independent from the Netherlands, Belgium has been a treaty-neutral country, which means the other major countries, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, all of them, agree to respect Belgian neutrality, meaning none of them will touch it. They'll leave it alone. Right? And if any of the other parties violate that, the others are honor-bound to come to its defense. So that's what the Belgians are invoking here is Germany signed a treaty that said they were going to leave us alone. They just violated it. Britain, France, you're part of that same treaty. Help, please.
Right.
The French, obviously, are already revving up for war. That's not a problem.
They already got the declaration from Germany that they were coming for them.
They get this. They've already got not the declaration of war, but the ultimatum.
Right.
They know what's coming.
They know what's coming.
Yeah.
So they're ready to jump in on the other side.
Obviously, the British are the issue here. Now, this is one of these.
Especially because they're mostly just a navy, and this sounds like mostly land conflict at this point.
Yeah.
Landlocked
don't worry.
conflict.
There's going to be plenty of naval conflict.
Oh, yeah. Now, the thing here is, this is a mistake Germany makes. It's not a mistake that leads to war, but it's a mistake probably one of the biggest mistakes the Germans make, is invading through Belgium. Because prior to this, while the British have an entente, what's called an entente with France and Russia, which is kind of like a understanding of friendship, there is no formal alliance. It's a mutual understanding, basically, of friendship and cooperation, and we've resolved some of our issues. That is what it is on paper.
A document that says, as a British citizen, I'm better than this idea of shooting you dead like the filthy French dog that you are.
In fact,
I get it.
Yeah. In fact, when the British military has been conducting like joint military operations in planning with the French army, the doves in the British military or in the British House of Commons are asking them, well, we're doing these plans with the French. Aren't we kind of committing ourselves to help them then? It's like, oh, no. There's no formal alliance. This is just discussions. Well, what happens now? We've made plans and promises to them. We have to come in on their side.
Right.
To which half of Parliament facepalms, because that's what they were exactly told the opposite. And prior to this, I know I've told you guys this separately, Sir Edward Grey is the foreign minister. For most of this thing, he hasn't been able to do shit because the cabinet's divided. And he knows if he takes any decisive action one way or the other, the government will fall. So he's got to sit on his ass for most of this. Well, this issue of Belgium now presents him an opportunity because while he can't sell a lot of people on, we have to come in to help France because of balanced power on the continent and big power diplomacy, yada, yada, yada. Coming in to protect the little guy is a much easier sell to both the government, the parliament, and to the public.
Oh, yeah, no, it allows you to have a position of moral justification.
Yeah, without the invasion of Belgium, there is a strong chance that at least for a while, Britain would have stayed out of the war. At least
I
for
don't
a
know
while.
how long that would have held.
At least for a while, depending on the results. If the French and the Russians started licking the Germans immediately, they would have stayed out completely. If
Yeah,
the
but
Germans
if the
started
Germans
winning,
had taken Paris,
then
things would
yeah,
be-
because the idea was for the British is always keep the balance of power. We don't want the Germans to become all powerful.
Well, yeah, their interests are abroad. They don't have the resources to
Yeah.
focus inward. They don't want to fight at home because they're too busy
Yeah.
fighting overseas.
They wouldn't even have a beef with Germany if the Germans hadn't started building the High Seas Fleet, the big giant navy that they have.
But the Kaiser just wanted to impress his grandmama.
Yeah, I know.
Do you love me enough now, grandmama?
See the earlier World War I and Kaiser episodes for the discussion on that. Anyways, so
Yeah, he had a British problem.
Belgium
He had many problems.
So yeah, the Belgians get the ultimatum on the 2nd, tell the Germans to fuck off. The next day, the Germans declare war on France. Following day after that, they declare war on Belgium. And then once this happens, the UK Parliament meets to discuss how they're going to respond. And on that same day, declares war on Germany due to what happened to Belgium.
Right.
So that's basically in the course of from the 1st to the 4th, you've gone from conflict between Austria and Serbia to continent-wide war, just by dominoes falling. Oddly enough, 2 of the last countries that actually issue formal declarations of war against each other are Russia and Austria.
Really?
The rest of Europe is at war before Austria and Russia actually get around to declaring war on each other. So you have this weird thing.
So they started mobilizing their troops before they had declared.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
So for like a day or so, you actually have this weird situation where there's an Austrian-Serbian war and a Germany versus France and Russia war before the Austrians
they
actually declare war on the Russians.
Link their wars together.
Yeah, it's weird.
Hey,
But,
we heard you guys were having a war. We're having a war. What
Let's
if we
have
had
a
war
great
together?
big war.
Yeah. All right. So and that,
Come together as a community and kill each other.
yeah, those are the diplomatic actions for the course of the year. The only other 2 things you have are Japan will enter the war on the side of the British because they want shit.
Reasons. Yeah.
Reasons.
Okay.
They have an alliance with the British. It's an opportunity to grab some shit in the Pacific. Opportunistic,
I was going to say, as
territorial
I'm looking
hunger.
at the map here, Italy and Spain, did they enter the war on
Spain,
the side
Spain
of...
will stay out the entire war, as it did both
Okay.
world wars. Italy will
and
join later.
Switzerland is right there in the middle of shit, too. Did they...
No.
Famously neutral.
Yeah. Italy will join later.
Okay.
The thing to note here with Italy is technically they're in an alliance with Germany and Austria at this point, but it's a defensive alliance. And they
Only
say,
if they get attacked, so they're saying, no, because you're attacking someone else, we're not a
because
part of
Austria attacked Serbia, from the way they look at it, we are not bound to
And at the
They
honor that
definitely
alliance.
did.
And at the very least, at this point in time, as many people are trying to stay out of it as they can, and the people
Right.
who are actually starting shit are trying to keep as many people out of it as they can.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's mutually beneficial.
They're
to just not
trying
fuck
to
with
keep
Italy
it
at this point.
smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and then the other one is the entrance of the Ottoman Empire into the war, but that is a whole other event we will get to later. That has to do with other shit later in the year.
Oh yeah, no, it's a fucking shit show how many declarations of war there
'Cause
are in this.
Yeah, that has to do with actual military actions that will lead to it. So we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah,
it'll be like
there's
the last
a
thing
lot
we
of
talk
little
about.
countries down there.
Oh yeah,
near that.
I believe
Serbia.
Montenegro also declares war on Austria.
Montenegro's there, Albania is there,
There's
Bulgaria
gotta
is
be-
there, Romania is there.
There's got to be some like folksy, catchy song that lists all of the war declarations of this.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I think Montenegro is the only other one. Montenegro declares war on Austria as an ally of Serbia at this point. I
Okay.
think. I don't know. Montenegro is one of those little things where it's like, oh yeah, they were there. Nobody talks
Well,
about
I
it.
mean, you look
but
at
they
the
were there.
size of them on the map, and
Yeah.
it's a tiny
Germany shooting at
country
Russia
among
and
other
London stands still
tiny
clean.
countries.
Anyways, all right. So we get to the point. People are now officially shooting at each other. War were declared,
And now war word breaking out.
and we basically have 3 fronts. You have the Eastern Front, where Germany and Austria are facing off against Russia. You have the Western Front, where it's Germany versus Belgium, Britain, and France. and you have the Balkan front where it's the Austrians and the Serbians. Now, we'll deal with it. The Serbian front is easiest to deal with.
So let's take that one first.
We'll take that one first. Over the course of the next few months, between August and the end of December, Austria will attempt to invade Serbia, be pushed back, do it again, be pushed back, do it again, be pushed back. Because while
I'm
the Serbians...
So they
detecting a
keep
pattern here.
trying, but it sounds like the Serbian group actually either got enough support or managed to mobilize fast enough to meet them.
Smaller army, but veterans. These guys have been spent in the past 2 years fighting their neighbors.
Okay.
They're all combat veterans. They know what they're doing. The Austrian army hasn't fought a full-scale war, in damn near 100 years.
Okay, so
My understanding, the reputation of the Serbian military was a rather fierce one at this current
Oh, yeah,
time.
these guys know how to kick ass.
These
There's not a
were
lot of them, but they're...
Yeah, these are
tough.
scary guys. To
Okay.
fight.
They're
This
tough
is like
motherfuckers.
This is like you run across SEAL Team 6 in the field, and it's just,
God
fuck.
damn it.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're also fighting for the survival of their country at this
Well,
point. That
right.
helps.
You know what SEAL Team 6? Because one guy's wearing a T-shirt over his body armor that says, I shot Bin Laden and I don't give a fuck about you.
One interesting little side story that I just have to mention.
And we're the ones that always go off on tangents.
Well, this is related. The general in command of the Serbian army, who will ultimately be largely responsible for repelling, I think, the first of those invasions, at the time war breaks out, he's actually like vacationing in Austria-Hungary at the time, and he gets detained by the authorities.
Oh,
Franz
shit.
Joseph, because he's an old school, gentlemanly kind of guy.
Right.
This dude came to the throne in 1848. He's
hope-
been around for a while.
I hope when this guy tells the story of this vacation, he ends it with, and that was only the second worst vacation I ever took.
Well, Franz Joseph, being the gentleman that he is, actually not only arranges for this guy to be sent back rather than be detained, but gives him his own private train to take him to the border.
Nice.
Which they then bites
Nice
them in the
guy.
ass because this guy leads the defense of Serbia and kicks him in
Yeah,
the butt.
immediately turns around
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
gentlemanly conduct has no place in war.
Yeah.
It really
That's
doesn't.
the lesson to be learned from that story.
That-
I suppose.
That shit gets people killed.
Yeah.
thought it produced better diplomacy, but I suppose if
No.
war were
No.
declared, diplomacy has
No.
failed
Yeah.
already.
There's an expression amongst historians: war is diplomacy by other means.
Yeah.
Once other means of diplomacy have failed.
No, diplomacy by other means.
Yeah,
They will
it's-
achieve an accord eventually.
Yeah. It is,
One
it
way or
is-
the
it is
other.
it is a method of achieving some sort of desired result.
Yes.
You go to war because you have a goal that you want to accomplish.
You could say it is the last diplomacy.
I call it aggressive negotiations.
Okay, so
Anyways, yeah, so that's the Serbian front. That's basically what happens there.
they keep pushing and keep getting turned back because the Serbians are just better fighters and more experienced.
Yeah, they get their butts kicked. The Eastern Front is the next simple one. This is
That's
again
the one
we're-
against Russia.
against Russia. Now this is where kind of again where we start to see balance comes into play. Austria
Well,
and
from
Serbia.
the map I was looking at, this particular front happens around what is eventually Poland.
Yeah, Russia controls most of what is now
Yes,
Poland.
at this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just trying to relate it to a modern map for
yeah,
anyone who doesn't automatically know the World War I pre-map.
yeah. But Russia basically has the borders of the former Soviet Union plus Finland plus most of Poland. And then Germany controls a larger piece of the Baltic coastline.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an arm
The
reaching out
German
over the top of
Empire
Poland.
at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Austria's to
I
the
was surprised
south.
to see that Amsterdam was its own.
Oh, the Netherlands?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Since they were their own thing since before the Napoleonic Wars. But
Yeah.
anyways,
For some reason, I had it in my head that at some point they were controlled by the German Empire.
they used to be part of the
Before
Holy
World
Roman
War
Empire,
I.
but that's way
Well,
the fuck
that's
back.
way, way long
That's
time.
way, way back.
Yeah.
No, but on the Eastern Front, you have two situations. One is a great success for the Russians. One is a great success for the Central Powers, Germany and Austria. The first one that happens is in Poland, coming out of Poland. The Russians managed to surprise the Germans and actually mobilize. I think they thought it was going to take more than a month. They managed to do it in 2 weeks.
Oh, nice.
At least part of their army. So
They busted their asses and got their shit in gear.
because the Germans thought that they were only going to be dealing with the French for a while, they have one small or undersized army, the German 8th Army, sitting out there in East Prussia on the defensive. All of a sudden, there are two much larger, individually much larger Russian armies coming right at them. Fuck.
Yeah, that sounds like an oh shit moment.
Yeah, no.
Just a little bit.
The commander of the German 8th Army,
When
Prittwitz.
the ammo's live, that's definitely an oh shit moment.
Yeah, the commander of the German army, Prittwitz, decides, all right, I gotta hightail it backwards. Otherwise, the one army's coming at me from the front, the other one's coming up from down below me. If I don't move, they're gonna get behind me and
Yeah,
surround
and
me.
they're just gonna obliterate us.
So I got to abandon East Prussia, unfortunately, and pull back and try to make sure they don't get to Berlin. The first thing that this does is it will cause the German army, General Moltke, the commander of the German armies, to pull troops out of the west and send them
so
east
from
to
the
defend.
French front
Right
to cross
yeah.
the entirety of the empire, and that's going to take some time moving
Yeah,
them
it'll
that
take
far.
a long time. Not that much because of the rail networks, but the important thing is they're no longer on the western front, and that will come into play later on.
Reduce the ability for the western front.
Right. So these forces start getting sent, and in the meantime, he sends them. He decides he's going to replace Prittwitz because he meets with other guys, and they say he's actually panicking a little. Things aren't that bad. We can still deal with this.
He's panicking. He's running away. Get rid of him. Promote me instead.
Yeah. In fact, Prittwitz had actually changed his mind, been convinced otherwise, and was going to make a stand, but he forgets to tell anybody else, so they don't know he's changed his mind. So they still fire him.
Oh.
They send two guys. One is someone we'll get to when we talk about the Western Front. A guy named
One
Eric.
of the guys from the western front, I'm
Eric
guessing.
Ludendorff. So I believe a major general at this point.
I've at least heard that name before.
Yeah. This guy will probably be. He is probably the single most important. If you had to name one person who's more important than anybody else in World War I, that guy, Ludendorff.
Which is probably why I've heard his name before.
Yeah. He's being sent over. It's kind of like the brains of the operation to be the chief of staff of the new head of the 8th Army, and this is going to be General Paul von Hindenburg.
Von Hindenburg.
Now everybody's heard the name Hindenburg. This is where
Well,
that came.
everybody knows about the Hindenburg Zeppelin.
Yeah, about the Hindenburg. This is the guy that's named after him.
Okay.
This guy, he'd already retired. He's been retired for years. He's pretty freaking old. But they pull him out because this dude's got a reputation for being the exact opposite of Prittwitz. He's steady. He's calm.
Wait, Zeppelins are World War I, aren't they?
Yes.
We get to talk about Zeppelins.
Not so much right now, but yes.
Yeah, we will talk about Zeppelins eventually.
Oh.
Not today, but we will.
Oh.
We will.
Okay.
The Zeppelins are coming, everyone. They're
The
coming. I
Zeppelins are
promise. But they
coming.
really are coming.
5 seasons later, we finally get Zeppelins.
If this ends with someone just teleporting behind a general and stabbing him, I'm gonna be so pissed off.
No, that's Yuri's Revenge. You got to play Command and Conquer for that.
You know, that was just on sale last week, and I picked
Oh.
up like most of the series.
Yes, it is an excellent series. I love that
I got
series.
3, the one with Tim Curry.
Oh, okay, I got that one too, but I've had it for years.
Anyways.
So
These two guys, Ludendorff gets sent out there to basically pick up Hindenburg on their way out to East Prussia. They basically agree that, yeah, we have a plan where we can deal with this. We're gonna basically take on each of these two Russian armies one at a time and defeat them in quick succession.
if you can manage that, that is a perfectly logistical way to do
I
it.
think they've got two advantages. Number one, the rail network. And
They
number
can
two,
move their troops faster.
And number two, these guys both know the terrain. And East Prussia is a weird kind of thing where it's forests, lakes, and hills.
Okay.
Not great terrain for large armies to move around in.
But great terrain if you enjoy camping on weekends.
Yeah, but
so
both these guys know that
knew
terrain.
the area.
Know this area really well.
That's really important when it
Right.
comes to warfare of that style.
So-
the terrain is so
Yeah,
important.
so they'll get there and they'll tell Prittwitz that he's gone. Hindenburg actually, I think, like actually lived with him in barracks for a while when they were younger.
So probably a little apologetic.
So it's like I hate to be the one to tell you this, dude, but you're gone.
You got fired. I'm sorry. I'm taking your job.
Yeah, he takes over, and then it becomes him, Ludendorff as his chief of staff, and also on his staff is a guy who was on Printwitz's staff named Max Hoffman.
Okay.
These three guys, Ludendorff and Hoffman, are the two.
Also a name I know.
Are probably the two of the biggest brains in the war. These guys are Hindenburg will get all the credit.
But these two were the brains behind
Ludendorff and
Hindenburg.
Hoffman are the strategists, the tacticians.
Okay.
All right. So, like I said, they decide they've got the Russian First and Second Armies coming into East Prussia, one from in front of them, one from below. They ultimately decide they're gonna try and attack one and then the other. Now, long story short, because we go into this really detailed, basically the Russians do some fuck ups. They pull a Antietam where the Germans find a copy of the both armies' orders on a dead guy.
Oh, wonderful.
Also, they're not fully encrypting their transmissions, so the orders on the dead guy get confirmed by radio transmissions they hear.
That's going to be a repeating problem.
And the Russian armies, they mobilize.
Well, with the tech they're dealing with at this point, yeah.
Yeah, and because the reason these armies were able to mobilize so quickly is they don't have proper logistics trains behind them. So by the time they get to the battlefield, they're already running out of shit.
Oh.
And don't have fully proper equipment.
Yeah, that's not good for
This
an
is
army.
basically a worst case scenario for the Russians and a best case scenario for the Germans. The 8th Army and the 1st Army, the Russian Army, fight a battle earlier on that's kind of a stalemate.
They take shots at each other, but ultimately end up backing down to...
Enough that this Russian Army has to stop for a while. He also doesn't know where the 8th Army goes after that. He thinks they're going in one direction and is worried about going to help the 2nd Army because if the Germans didn't go in that direction, that would be bad positioning, right? So he's wary of moving.
Right.
The other guy's being named Rennenkampf, is the guy in charge of the 2nd Russian Army. He's being aggressive as hell. And he keeps sending messages to the other guy, the other army, come help me. But he's not getting the responses. But he's just kind of like, fuck it. So he goes in, and due to bad decisions on this guy's part, and actually, the Germans get lucky. A couple of Ludendorff's orders get ignored, and because they get ignored, they actually end up in an even better position than they otherwise would have been because of stuff they didn't know was happening.
Hey, broken clocks and all.
Basically, the German 8th Army manages to completely surround the Russian 2nd Army and essentially annihilate it. So bad that Rennenkampf, when he realizes what happens, basically goes off into the woods and just shoots himself.
Oh, shit.
Because he lost his whole fucking army. Some of them managed to escape back into Poland, like just running like mad.
They fled.
A lot of them actually end up, a lot of the final fighting ends up like in these lakes or whatever. So some of these guys end up drowning or they get captured.
Now,
it's
is
a
this
really
like
ugly
a
scene.
prisoner of war scenario, or what? If you were found on the battlefield, you were just dead?
Oh, no. I mean, they take prisoners.
Did they take prisoners?
Oh, yeah.
For the most part. I mean, in any war, there are situations where people don't take prisoners.
Surrender.
Where people ignore surrenders, whatever. I'm honestly, the worst. Some of the worst stuff happens when with the civilians. Like you get farmers with pitchforks finding injured soldiers from the other side and just going to town on them.
Well, again, it's a common trend.
But and that happens on both sides of that border.
Yeah. Well, the way you said that it was a slaughter, a massacre, I'm wondering, was there a surrender?
Oh, yeah. A lot,
troops?
at least as many, like hundreds of thousands of prisoners. I forget the exact numbers involved, but at least as many. The Second Army is basically wiped out. It's still, they reconstitute it. After that, it will take part in other battles, but it's functionally out for a while.
This is World War I Germany, so this is pre-camps. What did they do with their prisoners of war? What was the
as far as we know, in this scenario, it's pretty bog standard stuff. You don't want to be in any of these camps because countries as a
well, you're an enemy combatant. You may have surrendered, but you're still a piece of shit.
You're not getting the best of anything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, you're not in a Russian camp in Siberia. Well, you're better off than that.
Okay.
I mean, the conditions are never great. There's disease and all that, but that's just par for the course for army war POW camps in this
But
era.
this wasn't anything out of the ordinary.
These are not
at
death
the-
camps. They're not deliberately going out of their
Gotcha.
way to kill anybody.
Gotcha.
No, everyone
Yeah.
is being
I know that
fed,
was World War
everyone is
II,
being
not World War
clothed.
I.
There is someone who's going to come around when it gets cold outside asking how many blankets they need.
When available, being the
Gotcha.
caveat there.
Gotcha.
Both sides, a lot of times they just don't have the stuff.
Oh,
Right.
I didn't
No,
say
I
they were
gotcha.
going to do it, but they will send someone to ask.
Yeah. No, honestly, and this is going further into stuff, but as the Germans will start pushing into Russia, it's actually the Russians who will start killing Jews, and they start running to the Germans to protect them.
Interesting.
So, quite ironically, but that's, yeah. The Russians were killing Jews en masse long before the Germans ever got into it.
Oh, there's
The Germans just industrialized the
Okay.
process.
As fucked up
Oh.
as this comment will sound out of context, there is a long and proud history of anti-Semitism all across Europe.
Oh, yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
centralized in any one area. It is everywhere.
I think you could argue that it goes all the way back to, well, the Roman Catholic,
It's before
Oh,
that.
the Roman Empire.
the
era,
Roman
yeah.
Empire,
Yeah, no.
and the fact that
As
the
long
religion
as-
is
as long
had
as there have
spread
been
that
Jews,
far.
there have been people fucking with them.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
it's the age-old battle between Catholicism and Judaism.
There's a reason.
Jews and everybody. Literally
Well,
Jews and
yeah,
everybody.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Yeah, side conversations
So,
for
and this is called the
Another
Battle of Tannenberg, right? I don't know if you've ever heard of that name.
we're
Battle
talking
of
about the
Tannenberg?
Russian battle.
The battle where the Russians got their ass kicked,
Yeah, okay, Tannenberg.
right? The biggest thing that comes out of this, I mean, first of all, it stops the Russian invasion of Germany in its tracks,
Yeah.
right?
Stonewalls them.
Right? Also, it makes Hindenburg and Ludendorff national heroes.
Right, they stopped the Russian invasion.
The Battle of Tannenberg is the single most decisive battle of the entire war.
Oh,
There will never be another battle, single engagement that is as decisive
as that one.
as that one is.
Okay.
Right? This makes them national heroes, which means immediately, once more armies start getting to the Eastern Front for the Germans, Hindenburg will be put in charge of all of those armies and will keep going up the ranks with Ludendorff as his chief of staff going up with him long term.
Right. It's
And that
nice
will-
to be a big brain attached to somebody who's got a star on their forehead.
Eventually, these two become so politically powerful and so beloved, they're functionally the dictators of Germany.
Okay.
That's a story for another day, though.
Yeah, I think that's a few years down the
Yeah,
line.
that's down. That's
There's
a
a
lot of
reason
stuff.
they're naming airships after this fucker later.
right.
Yeah, they actually came up like an emblem that people used to refer to them, where it was an H with an L coming off the H. They were, like,
Okay.
synonymous
Hindenburg
with each other.
Ludendorff.
The Hindenburg Ludendorff team. They're like one.
They
one
were
man, one
bros,
person.
man.
Yeah.
Bros.
Although as things go along, it's less Hindenburg and more Ludendorff.
Well,
By the end of it, Hindenburg's basically just sitting around getting his portrait taken, looking nice, looking pretty. But
Hey, he has
kind
to
of
post
like
for
the
all those
Kaiser
airship
and
ads.
Bismarck.
yeah. All right. So that's the
Kind
first
of
thing.
like Kaiser and Bismarck.
That's the first thing. Massive Russian defeat on against the Germans. Against the Austrians, it's a different story. And this begins the long history of Conrad fucking shit up. The long train of events. He orders, I think it's 4 armies to invade. It's either 3 or 4 armies to invade Russia. Just straight up invade Russia. Because the Austrians know the
Just
Germans
push
have,
as far as you can.
right, because the Austrians know the Germans have only got that one army, and that's the idea. Problem is, they had multiple plans, like how many armies to use. Conrad, because he wants to deal with Serbia, sent a large portion of their reserve down to deal with Serbia
Okay,
So
to
when
help
they-
the Austrians.
to help the fight with Serbians rather than the front with the Russians. This means the Austrian army is vastly outnumbered by the Russians, and they're attacking them. The details are not important, but bottom line is they get beaten so badly. Not only do they almost get completely wiped out, the entire fucking army, not one field army, the whole fucking thing.
Right.
And the Germans have to send in forces to eventually save their asses. The Austrian army, and they eventually hold off the Russians after they push hundreds of miles into their territory. Between that and the Serbian thing, the Austrian army is so beaten up, has taken so many casualties, lost so many prisoners, and most importantly, lost so many officers, veteran officers.
Their army is essentially shattered.
They're a spent force. First
Wow.
opening battles of the war, not even a year into the war, they will be nothing more than reserve forces for the Germans for the rest of the conflict.
Wow.
It's basically the Germans fighting everybody else at that point.
They fought, and they were smacked down so hard they became a lesser player in the war.
They're placeholders. They hold defensive positions on the line until the Germans are ready to attack.
Pretty shocking considering that you could argue they started this entire conflict.
But this is where
and they ended up a minor player because they got smashed so hard. It was only due to the treaties they had and the complex shittery that was the politics that turned this into a war in the first place. If they'd just been smashed down.
Getting smashed like that shows why they were trying to ally with such much more powerful nations.
Right.
And how behind they were. I mean,
yeah.
You can make an argument that the Ottomans did more than the Austrians frickin' did. You can make that argument. I'm not going to make it, but you can make it. Anyways, but this is where you start to see that balance. You get the one big Russian defeat up in the north, but then in the south, it's the exact reverse.
Yeah, I was going to
neither
ask,
side
has the war expanded down to the countries more to the south and... I mean,
the Balkan states?
Yeah.
No,
is
they're still
the
out of
Ottoman
it.
Empire still out of
they
it?
They're still out of it.
Okay.
We're still in the August and September here, basically.
Okay.
I think.
We're still in the early days of.
Yeah. There will also be on the Eastern Front 2 more battles of war. The Battle of Warsaw, the first Battle of Warsaw, and the first Battle of Luz in what is now Poland. Warsaw is basically a Russian victory. The Germans try to take it and they hold them off. Luz is a technical German victory. They take the city. They're in a good strategic position, but they're not like kicking their asses.
Yeah, right.
The big thing
they do manage to actually take Warsaw and hold it.
No,
but,
they don't take Warsaw. They take
no,
Luz.
they take Luz, which you
but
said
they don't
was
take
Poland?
Yeah, these are both Polish cities.
Oh.
In Russian Poland.
Right.
Right. But the biggest thing here is because the Germans are outnumbered on this front by the Russians by it's sometimes more than 2-1. These battles basically keep the Russians off balance long enough that the Russians can't
after the
attack them.
first Russian failure and the loss of one of their 2 armies, or did they end up losing both of them?
They lost
the
almost
German
all of
pincer
one.
Attack?
Almost all of one, and then the other one gets pushed back.
Okay. But, they're dealing with half the forces they originally had active out there. And
but the thing is, though, as the Russians keep mobilizing, they're mobilizing a lot more guys.
Troops are coming.
Yeah, the Russians are still at the overall advantage.
Oh, right. It's just it takes time and logistics to get all of those extra soldiers there. For now, the German front is doing well because Russia is still mobilizing.
They're holding. At this point, they're vastly outnumbered, but they're managing to do enough damage to keep the Russians from being able to take the initiative.
Okay.
I feel this really speaks to just how ill-equipped the Russians ultimately were sending people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They weren't prepared for this, and they mobilized too fast.
Yeah, we can get into discussions about the guys running the Russian army and the Russian war minister and a lot of shit where if their things had been properly managed, they could have kicked the Germans and the Austrians' asses just by sheer force of numbers. But
if
they weren't.
Had properly mobilized with the correct logistics. But
going back years, they had problems with their army going back years that they never fix. But that's what happens in the East. Basically, each side gets a big win, and they kind of
stalemates.
Right? They kind of settle down for the winter. We already said Serbia manages to hold on for dear life. Now we get to the West.
Yeah,
which is where most of the action is.
This is the big front.
I mean, the Eastern Front is physically bigger, but this is the one where trench warfare is going to happen. This is the one everybody hears about when you hear about World War I.
When you talk about it in high school and watch movies and shit, it's always the French front.
Yeah.
Now, in looking at the map, there is a fair portion of border that's shared by the German Empire and France.
Yep.
But you said they chose to go through Belgium instead.
And that's because, remember we talked about those French fortresses?
Right, that were right on the border that they were trying to get them to turn over?
Yeah, the Germans have basically determined we can't break through that shit.
So they're
we're
going to
go
through
around.
Belgium to circumvent
those
defenses.
We're going to envelop them. We're going to surround them, come on them from behind, and crush them.
And pincer move. Okay, I gotcha.
A half pincer move. Right? That is the idea. The French plan is the opposite. The French believe in the principle of élan, which is basically just if you have enough determination and will, you can win anything. Which is why they don't have any heavy guns, and a lot of are really like when Paris comes under siege, its defenses are crap because they don't believe in the defensive. Anybody in the French army who advocates doing anything defensively gets their career ruined.
Again,
if you've got enough moxie, you'll win.
Yeah.
Again, their military is entirely geared towards light strike forces. They're just not equipped at this point.
I mean, it's well equipped. It's just their tactics suck.
Right.
It largely comes from the Franco-Prussian War, where they were slow to react, and the Prussian armies just lightning fast beat the crap out of them. So this is kind of the reverse. The response way too far in the other direction.
Their entire plan was for an offensive. They
Yeah.
had no.
They're
They're
just gonna be up against the French border or the German border, and they're gonna shove off, push in, try to get to the Rhine. If we get there, keep going till we hit Berlin. That is the French plan.
All right.
Right? And the army, the situation here you have 5 French armies lined up on this border with, it's 4 kind of like right on the border, and there's there's a 5th army that's kind of off to the back in case the
so
Germans,
they can fill any holes that seem like they're weakening.
Or once they declare war on Belgium, it's like, okay, these guys will deal with it if they kind of skirt just through the little tail part of Belgium, right?
It's important to have a mobile cavalry unit to, well
it's not cavalry. It's an army.
Right, but having a backup force that can come to the
covering
rescue
their flank
is
would be the term you're looking
very
for.
common in military tactics.
While the others will push forward. The 5th Army will kind of cover their flank, and then the others will just push in. That's their plan. They have 5 armies. The Germans have 7 armies. You can see the implications of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That 5th Army is going to have...
The numbers don't lie.
The Germans are also well trained and well equipped.
Yeah.
So
they all line up pretty much in matching, although the French armies are numbered 1 through 5 starting on the Swiss border going north, and the Germans are reversed. So their first army is up in Belgium.
That's just numbering systems.
Yeah. Which makes it convenient to talk about because they're all in order.
Yeah, exactly.
But
you've got 7 armies against 4 with a backup.
7 armies against 5, and these armies. Not every
I'm
country
sure the
has,
Germans kept a couple in reserve to be able to do the same, fill holes and back
Nope.
up.
Nope.
No,
did they just
really direct?
Yeah.
Straight line?
Really
that's
direct.
that's why the Russians are facing off against one little tiny pissant army. They've got everything else in the Schlieffen plan.
Okay.
And you got to remember, not every country has armies of the same size. So
Well, right. Specific numbers are going to vary from country to country.
and from unit to unit,
Exactly.
there are French, German armies that are the ones in the middle and on the actual border are smaller, whereas the ones on the German right, the ones that are going through Belgium, are bigger because they're the ones that are going to be doing all the heavy lifting.
And they know they have to fight Belgium as well. So,
Right.
yeah.
So now that's basically what we're going to have. What happens here is, again, there's a lot we could talk about. There's an entire book written, all quiet on the Western Front, The Guns of August, which just covers basically the first month or so of the fighting and the war. You can get really into this. We're going to talk about 3 things. There are 3 things we're going to talk about: the Battle of Liège, the Battle of the Frontiers, and the Marne.
Ah, yes.
Which I know, if
The
you've heard about
infamous
World War I,
Marne.
the Battle of the Marne. Technically, the first Battle of the Marne. There was a second one later on, but the
But
Battle of the Marne.
let's start
This is
with
the
I
one
think
everybody
you said
talks
Ish.
about. Liège. Liege. Liege. It's kind of like French pronunciation.
Yeah,
Liège.
Liège.
Liège, I think that's how it's pronounced.
Something like that. We're not
Liège.
French. We don't speak it well.
Yeah. Now, the thing with Liège is, if you look on your map, Belgium's border with Germany is really tiny, right?
Yeah, no, it's a relatively small patch of
Territory. The Germans have to pass 3 armies through that. And the Belgians have one fortified city, the city of Liège, in that way, which means in order to get through there, they've got to take that city.
to take Liège.
Right?
Yeah.
And this thing is pretty well fortified. Even though Belgium is neutral, this thing's got some pretty heavy fucking defenses to it. So even before the armies have started moving up to the border, there's a special unit that's sent in to specifically deal with this.
Right. Yeah, you're
Right?
SEAL Team 6.
Yeah. And this is where Ludendorff first comes to everybody's attention. He gets sent in as kind of a liaison officer because
So this is before he gets sent to the Western Front.
or to the east. Yeah.
Or
First he gets sent
Eastern
here.
Front, sorry.
He gets sent there as a liaison because he's the guy on the planning staff who actually came up with a plan to do this. So, and the Germans have a thing where they actually send their planning guys out there in case,
In case the plan changes.
no plan survives contact with the enemy. Right. It's good to have the guy who made the plan there to improvise. Well, Ludendorff, he gets there, comes across I think it's the brigade that has lost its commander. He takes it upon himself to take command of this unit and basically maneuvers it into a position where they can get to the central citadel of the Belgian fortification setup. And before that, he gets in a position where the Belgians' like mobile army, the actual guys out in the field who aren't in the forts, they decide, oh shit, these guys are vulnerable, we got to move them. So he sends them away. So now it's just the forts by themselves. There is no field army. Then Ludendorff goes up by himself. Like, when they realize the central citadel isn't firing at him, he goes up there by himself, takes his sword, because they still had swords for officers back in these days, bangs the pommel on the door and demands they surrender.
That is wonderful.
They do it.
That is classic.
They
I love
outnumber
that.
Ludendorff's
Yeah,
guys.
No, they looked at the people. I was like, that dude's got a fucking sword. I'm not playing this game.
Yeah, they had the numerical advantage, but for whatever reason, just intimidation factor, I guess,
Dude,
they
he had a
surrender.
fucking sword.
Straight up chutzpah.
Yeah. So the central piece of the entire defensive
that may
network.
not be a term you want to use in this time frame.
Yeah. No, but so he takes these central.
Cojones.
Yeah.
They're not involved.
Not
It's a
at
safe
all.
term.
Anyways,
I don't know what the German equivalent of that would be.
so
Balls.
he has taken the central piece of the entire defensive network without firing a shot. For this, he gets the
Accolades.
I forget what it's called, the Port de la Mer or something like that. It's got a French name. It was created by Frederick the Great, who was a Francophile, so he named it, gave it a French name. The highest award the Germans give, even higher than the Iron Cross.
Oh, nice.
And then he
Top accolades.
and then gets sent out there as a reward to be Hindenburg's chief
To
of
go
staff.
deal with the Eastern
Right.
Front.
So yeah, that's the start of Ludendorff. I wanted to mention that one story
that-
at least, because he will come back
That is
again.
pretty badass. He intimidated his way into getting a town to surrender.
Is
Afford
100%
sword.
the sword. The sword did all of the
Yeah.
heavy lifting.
All right. Needless to say, Liège holds up for a long, good while, mostly because the Germans don't have their guns up right away. In the international press, Liège becomes kind of like the little engine that could, where it's like, oh my God, they're doing it. They're stopping them.
They're still there.
Like it's like the 300. It's like, oh my God, these bastards might keep them from actually invading this one little fort. Holy shit! I mean, eventually the Krupp guns and the Austrian siege guns show up, and while the Liège forts are modern, they ain't that modern,
They just crumble.
and they get
even
blown
light
to pieces.
artillery's gonna decimate
Oh,
Stone
yeah.
Mason.
They get blown to fucking pieces eventually, and pretty much on schedule. Only a little bit behind, so the Germans are still good.
So how long does it actually take? How long is the siege of Liège?
Liège goes from August 5th to August 16th
Okay, so just over 2 weeks.
of a
or
siege.
Just under 2 weeks
Yeah.
of siege.
By the way, I forgot to mention, Tannenberg was August, a little bit later on the timeline, August 26th to 30th.
Okay.
And the attacks, yeah. Now,
Well, yeah, because you said Tannenberg had to deal with Ludendorff, and if this
Yeah,
happened before
beforehand, yeah.
he got sent there.
Right. Now, what the next thing that'll happen is the French are at the same time are launching their attack, right? And it's initially successful, surprisingly so. It is surprisingly successful because the Germans are letting them do it. They're drawing them in.
In the words of Admiral Akbar, it's
a
a trap.
The Germans are letting them do it. The idea being, if the other army's going to go around the back, if we draw them in,
You get to crush them.
we crush them easier, right? Now,
Tried and true tactics.
it actually gets to a point here where one of the flanks of the armies are exposed, where it looks like, holy crap, the French have made a mistake. We might be able to just crush one of these French armies here, And then if that happens, we don't even need to rely on the Schlieffen plan. We'll have broken through down here. And they're setting it up like, all right, keep going back, and we almost have them where we want them. Then one stupid bastard who's trigger happy, who keeps thinking,
There's
I can't tell
always
my
one.
boys to keep retreating, decides to counterattack, and it works. He pushes the French all the way back to where they started, but he also pushes them out of the fucking trap.
Right, which cancels their plan.
Yeah, so then the guy says, because he's pushing them back and he's successful, he starts asking Moltke for more troops. I think I can
And
push
because
past
it's successful,
I think I can push these past these forts that we already determined we can't push past. And Moltke, who's kind of an indecisive guy and doesn't have good intel coming from the field.
sure, why
He's
not?
still back in Germany, well back in HQ. He gives him some troops.
Yeah, because this
Decides,
doesn't give
sure,
the
why
French-
not?
So
Because this doesn't give the French the exact advantage we were trying to
yeah.
attain.
So we've taken
And then the Germans get drawn into the French's trap.
yeah. So now we've taken troops off to go to Tannenberg. We've taken troops off to go to the border front, and then we have to take off troops of the First Army, the one that's furthest out, because the
to
German
come and
that
support this dude.
that Belgian army that fled. Well, it's managed to stay intact and is now pulled back to the city of Antwerp, which is basically on the northern corner of the border with Holland, with the Netherlands, and on the channel, on the water. So if the Germans go to curve around, they all of a sudden have this Belgian army up above them. They have to deal with that. So they have to pull off more troops to kind of pin those guys there. Along with a couple other forts that they have to take on their way down, which we won't go into, they lose basically an entire army's worth of guys spread out to other things by the time they actually get to where they need to go.
Now, were the Netherlands involved?
No, they're
Okay.
neutral.
Okay, I thought they stayed neutral.
Yeah,
through
they stay
this.
neutral through this. Now, before we get to the Marne, Le Mans, it's basically the Germans come around, they get around that flank. The French commander, Joseph Joffre, even though the Germans have declared war on Belgium and they start getting reports of troops going into Belgium, he thinks they're just going to go through the Ardennes forest, this little narrow piece of it, not all the way through it. So he keeps telling the French Fifth Army under a guy named Lorenzac, who
Only defend that area.
yo, stay there. I don't think they're coming. There's no reason. There's no threat over there. Lorenzac, now this guy is the MVP. If there's an MVP on the Western Front on the Allied side in 1914, it's this
that
guy.
War is reduced to that of a sporting competition.
This guy, again, we can't go into all the individual engagements, but there are multiple times where this guy, through his smooth thinking, ignoring orders a couple of times, and just generally seeing things coming, manages to save the French army from being outflanked at the outset. Dude does a superb job. He's probably the best general they
Dude
have
knew
at
his
this point.
tactics and knew when to say no to his bosses.
Or
Yeah.
he got lucky a couple of times.
Combination.
same diff.
A combination. It's a combination of all of it. Because there were a couple of times where they get out of it by the skin of their teeth. There's a couple of times where the Germans have the opportunity to completely destroy Lorenzac's army, but because of bullshit going on their side or just dumb or bad luck, they miss the opportunity. There are any number of these. I could fill an entire discussion with just in 1914 in the march to the Marne from the Belgian border all the way down to the Marne River in France of coincidental things where if it had gone a different way, if somebody had been paying attention, if somebody hadn't given a bad order, one side or the other might have been able to completely just devastate the other side.
But being that there are surely podcasts already doing that, we're going
Yeah,
to take
we're
a
not
little
gonna-
wider view.
Except to say that the coincidences basically stalemate each other. Each side has a number of situations where they fuck up, but then the other side fucks up. They have a missed opportunity. The other side has a missed
A
opportunity.
comedy of errors, as
Yes.
it were. With death.
Now, eventually, this
Would
gets
that be a
Laurent.
comedy of tragedies?
No.
Or a tragedy of errors?
No, that's what a comedy of errors is.
Yeah. Eventually, Lorenzac being that good gets him fired because Joffre is one of the most politically minded generals you ever frickin' see. Quiet as hell, calming. Dude never shows his cards, but he's politically minded as hell. Sees
Okay.
anybody outdoing him, or heaven forbid, somebody saying he's wrong and then being right
He's going
as a
to.
threat.
Okay.
So he gets rid of them. There are also other political reasons having to do with the British why that happens, but not getting into that. that means the other thing we want to mention here is as the French armies are being pushed back because they're being nearly outflanked, they don't have the men to cover the whole line.
Right.
Eventually, the British Expeditionary Force does arrive. Most of these armies are made up of anywhere from like 3 or 4 corps, I think, and army corps. Some of them bigger than that. The British Expeditionary Force, which is almost their entire regular army, is only 2 corps.
So
It's
if we're talking
tiny.
numbers, we're talking a couple of thousand.
About 100,000 or so.
Okay.
But
okay.
fighting alongside armies of millions.
Right. Okay.
Well, by the time these armies fully mobilize, they all number in the millions, except for the British.
Trying to figure sense of scale here.
Yeah. You wouldn't, almost irrelevant. The French are almost really? This is barely going to help. But at this point, they need it because they're being flipping out flanked. The British will actually start fighting the Germans and do actually pretty well. But
yeah, I know the German or the British sent tons of reinforcements into
later though
the Western Front later. That was after they took.
Well, because it's a volunteer army,
Paris.
so they have to recruit all new guys, and it takes about a year and a half for all those guys to get trained and actually get to the continent. But in the meantime, the British start doing well. They're fighting the Germans and doing pretty well.
Well, at this point, the British front against the Germans is mostly naval, right?
Yeah, there's Navy stuff going on, and they've got their army is now kind of attached to the French army. It's kind of sitting out there to the left.
They've added reinforcements to the French army.
Right. Although they're not cooperating very well. At one point, the commander of the British army.
I wonder why.
The commander of the British army, oddly enough, named John French. At one point gets to where he thinks the French have basically lost the war and is preparing to withdraw his army. The head of the British War Minister, Lord Kitchener, has to come across the channel and basically chew his ass out in private. We don't know what was said, but whatever it was, after he said it, John French was cooperative.
That's a personality.
Yeah, actually, that is, part of that is believed to be he promised to get rid of Lorenzac, who French didn't like. But that's a whole other thing. But the British are successful, but because the French are getting pushed back, they have to keep withdrawing.
Okay.
The one story I will mention with the British here is at the Battle of Mons, which is the first battle they fight in Belgium. There's a legend that comes up that's known as the Angel of Mons. And it's basically that while the British are fighting at Mons, and when they're taking heavy casualties, an angel appears. An angelic being appears above the battlefield and either stops the Germans or just kind of declares that the British will win, or something like that.
Time-traveling superheroes.
Right.
Okay, clearly they witnessed a Lizard Illuminati plot, and it just blew their mind.
The second half of this is, though, now, way back during the 100 Years' War, I think, the Battle of, I think it's Agincourt, happened near where Mons is today. Or there was something, I think it was connected to the Battle of Agincourt, where a bunch of British archers, single-handedly held off, this massive French attack or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Agincourt Hill, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was reported
100
afterwards.
English archers held off something like 10,000, no, that's going back to legends which are not factual, and
a lot of guys.
Yeah,
a lot of guys.
A lot of guys.
Many dudes.
Well, it was reported after the Battle of Mons.
Hey, most of my history knowledge comes from Bardic song. It's not my fault I'm a musician.
Kind of is.
Yeah. Anyways, there were reports after the Battle of Mons that when they were going through the dead, there were German corpses found with arrows in them.
Neat.
Possible.
Unfortunately, they since proved that this is all bullshit. That they've traced that back to the guy who, the people who actually came up with it, the reporters who came up with the stories, and it happened well after the battle. But it's just a really cool story.
It is.
And I like to put that because for a long time people didn't have the proof of that, and it was kind of a thing that went around.
It.
And it is romantic as hell.
Yeah.
So I just figured I'd throw that in there.
Angel murders romantic?
Well, the idea that the spirits
I'm starting to
of...
see why you don't date.
Oh.
I assure you, while there are reasons
Low
for
blow,
that
going
ain't it.
right for the crotch there, aren't you?
Sits down to dinner, things are going well. So have I told you about angel murder?
Anyways, all right. But anyways, so they get pushed back. The French and the British get pushed back, and eventually they get all the way pushed back, all the way basically to Paris, out in front of Paris. The Allied line doesn't extend out that far; it falls short of Paris. But the Germans, originally the German line was supposed to go around Paris, but because of the loss of troops,
The way things funneled,
they're
ended
coming
up sending
down
them
on
straight
top of
into
Paris.
Paris.
On top of Paris. Right? Now, we get down to this point, a couple of different things happen. The frontiers battle stalemates. Despite the German reinforcements or whatever, it turns into a
That's
stalemate.
down where the forts are,
Yeah,
right?
because those guns they use to destroy Liège are not powerful enough to destroy the forts the French have. Because of this,
Because they're
Joffre,
newer forts.
Joffre is able to start pulling off reinforcements from that part of the front
To
and
reinforce the
the other
Paris
side
front.
of the line, right? So you end up with a German or French. They start building a Sixth Army out in front of Paris and a Ninth Army. Don't ask me where 7 and 8 are. I don't understand that shit. There's
It's all good.
the naming conventions, but the Ninth Army kind of takes up a position in the middle that will allow them to kind of stretch out there, and the Sixth Army is basically to defend Paris.
Okay.
Now, this one, the Ninth Army is made up mostly of veteran guys from like the other side of the front, guys who've already fought. The Sixth Army is made up mostly of reserves that are just coming online.
And reserves and new guys just fresh out of training.
Who have not fought yet.
That does not equate a happy equation.
Yeah. So, and the guy, we need to mention here a guy who's technically the deputy head of the French army, named Gallieni, who is named military governor of Paris, because they look around at the defensive perimeter and realize it's been neglected and we're shit. If the Germans attack, we're kind of screwed. So he's put in charge of, in addition to the defense of Paris, the Sixth Army, and this is where you get the story of taxi cabs. Using the taxis to get guys out to the front. He does. This is him. So he's building up the Sixth Army, trying to get as many guys into it as he can, before the French First Army gets there. And basically, the Battle of the Marne is what happens when these two sides finally meet. And what basically happens is, with the addition of the British Expeditionary Force and this new Sixth Army, a gap will form between the German First and Second Armies, inadvertently. And
they didn't hold the line.
Yeah, while the Germans are dealing with the French Sixth Army, because he now thinks there's nobody in front of him, right? Because the British have pulled back. Because that whole thing with French thinking they were defeated or whatever. Eventually, French turns around and starts moving up, along with with the Fifth Army. And they don't know they're doing this, but they start moving into that gap.
Okay, so you now have a spike of Allied forces
coming up in between and potentially behind the Germans. And so the Germans realize, oh shit, they're coming in behind our lines. All of a sudden, because of the French troops that have moved over here and the Germans pulling guys out that way, the odds have actually flipped. That overwhelming right wing in the Schlieffen Plan now finds itself outnumbered.
Right, because of this army cutting in behind their
Because the French have been able to move guys. The overall numbers are still about equal. It's just where most of them are.
Hey, the French
shifted.
quick action plan.
Right, so
It does
at this point,
work.
If used appropriately, yes, and this worked.
They were at this point. This is where the French have decided. They've stopped. The other armies.
They've
hold
stopped
off the Germans.
retreating. Now they're ready to offensive again.
I would just like to paint a little mental picture right now too. At this point, the German military understands that your combat uniforms should be relatively basic colors, usually dark, in order to blend into your surroundings.
Yeah.
The French are still wearing blue shirts and red pants. Blue shirts and red pants.
Imperial
caps,
uniforms.
Yeah, no, their army or the French army is still wearing really bright colors, and regiments.
They're wearing regimental
Holy-
You can see him
uniforms.
a half mile
Yeah.
off in the dark.
Yeah, this will come to an end very quickly, but
Oh,
1914
that
is
is
a problem.
unfortunate.
Oh yeah, no, they learned very quickly, but
This war evolved all sorts of things. Fashion just happened to be several of them.
dude, there's still cavalry charges in this bitch.
I
There's,
know.
there's also, there's some cavalry.
I know, it's
that
awesome.
That stops relatively quickly because they start getting gunned down. There's
Hey,
a story.
horses are a big target.
There's a famous story
It
about.
doesn't take much to put one down.
There's a famous story. It happens
Fuck
somewhere
up
in
one
here
of their legs.
about a German regiment. I think it was that was raised of all like students in that. It was like a club. They all signed up together, and they're all new volunteers. Barely no real training. Right, the reserves. They go into battle singing songs and like with flowers and shit. Like it's almost like the hippie brigade. And basically,
That's wonderful.
they get mowed down like nobody's business.
Oh.
In the areas where they're actually these brigades are actually able to break through a little bit, they don't know what to fucking do afterwards, so they all just mill around,
Yeah,
stand
they
around,
have no training.
doing nothing, just walking around in a field until
What are
the
you
enemy comes
doing?
back and wipes out the rest of them.
Occupying foreign territory?
Yeah, no, there's a large mass grave I believe in France, where a lot of these kids are buried, where one of the mothers paid to have a large statue of a crying mother and father built over it or whatever. It's really well-known war memorial now. Before we finish with the Battle of the Marne, one thing I need to mention, because I'd be remiss if I did not mention this, and that's what is colloquially known as the Rape of Belgium.
The Rape of Belgium.
I think that term is applied here. Either that or
Germany
I'm
really
confusing
stuck
it.
their dick in, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't
Rape
think
the
I'm
land and
confusing
pillage
it with.
the women.
Now, while this is not
Evil
as
men.
bad as
Remember maxim number 1: pillage, then burn.
while it's not as bad as like it gets exaggerated in the Allied press what actually happens, as everything does. Propaganda is propaganda,
Propaganda is propaganda.
and
Every side has it and uses it to their supposed
and it is by no means the
advantage.
worst thing that happens. On either side of the war. Basically, what it is as the German army is moving through Belgium, there's a memory in the German army of some of these guys personally, the older ones, during the Franco-Prussian War, of civilian snipers, largely organized often by French priests, who would take pot shots at the soldiers marching through cities.
Yeah, no, that's standard job
Right.
for a sniper.
Combine that, and obviously it's civilians, on the uniform, so they're technically spies, right? Which professional soldiers don't like. Combine that with the fact that they're generally just all these guys are kind of pissed off at the Belgians because they honestly thought the Belgians were just going to let them through.
Right.
So that they're mad that they have to deal with these guys in the first place. They start getting into some of the towns, and one or two civilians or whatever take a shot or something, and they all start freaking out and
What
thinking,
about snipers in their midst?
and they will start doing the thing where they start rounding up civilians and executing them en masse.
War crime shit.
Right? They start rounding up priests and
Belgium
executing
did
them because
this.
they're priests.
Or
'cause they
Germany
think they're
did this in Belgium.
in Belgium
Okay, gotcha.
because they think they're organizing.
and
To
to fight back.
You can
right.
understand why they did it. It's not excusable, but you can understand where it comes from.
I can understand the line of thinking that
Yeah.
took to reach that conclusion. I definitely don't.
You can't condone it.
Condone it,
Yeah.
but I can
I mean, you
understand
understand it
how those minds
because-
came to those conclusions.
Because there are some civilian snipers. It's not like this is not a thing. These guys are
there are
walking,
mercenaries.
they
there
are marching along and
Yeah.
watching their buddies get picked off by people they can't fucking see.
Yeah.
That has a
Oh, no,
psychological effect
War
on guys.
brings out all sorts of horrific ends to means.
Also is the narrative
or
that
means to ends.
the narrative that this sort of narrative will take place in every country at some point, but it starts in Germany because they have this whole idea of them being surrounded with a French-Russian thing.
Right.
That basically this is a fight for their survival as a nation.
Right.
And therefore, things that aren't normally justified are justified because this is a fight for survival.
Yes.
And that will start to play into it. And things happen.
That's been an idea far longer than World War I. That is always a useful propaganda to convince your people to fight.
The most famous example of this is the destruction and the burning of the city of Louvain, which is kind of your like if you can think of like a fairy tale idyllic medieval city.
Bruges.
Louvain is that kind of thing. It had a famous, really old library with a lot of really old, priceless
I can
stuff
name
in
of
it.
an instance of it older than that.
Well,
It's a little thing called the Crusades. They're different than us. We have to kill them.
well, but so it's this really important
Sounds
historical.
justified.
It's this really important historical, culturally important site,
Different.
and the Germans burned this bitch to the ground, including
Yeah.
this library with all these artifacts and all this stuff in it.
Yep.
This makes international news. This is the start of the Germans, you motherfuckers narrative.
Okay.
This is the start of the process of neutral countries starting to not like the Germans. This is the start of the
This
process
is
of
the
us.
second avalanche of people getting pissed off at the Germans and deciding to join the war.
First. Well, nobody's joining the war yet, but this is the start of...
Well, I'd say the first avalanche is war were declared that we discussed already. This is a new avalanche of
that-
people being
that hadn't
pissed
That's
off.
pretty much expected.
Yeah, that hadn't had time to marinate yet. That will eventually get retconned based on stuff that happens later on. The
Okay.
narrative gets backbuilt.
Well, history is written by historians.
Yeah. But in the meantime, like in the U.S., this has a big effect of the Germans starting to come off as... It's a diplomatic disaster for them.
Well,
Belgium
at least
was
in
already...
the U.S., the war was way over there across the ocean. It didn't have
we were
anything to
selling
do
shit
with
to,
us.
like almost every major player at the outside.
Both sides, yeah.
Right.
This is the start of the lean to one side. It's not a big
because the
thing.
information is now getting over to the U.S.
Yeah.
of, oh, this horrific shit is happening over there,
It's
and the
not
Germans
a
are
big
at
step.
fault.
It's not a giant step, but it's a step. And obviously, we'll come up later at the end of the war, how Germany is treated at the end of the war. Because you also have...
That's
they
a
wouldn't-
few seasons
yeah.
down the road.
Yeah. Germany wasn't supposed to be in Belgium anyways. They've already broken
We swear
international
the
law.
Zeppelins will show up eventually.
Yeah. They've already broken international law by being in Belgium in the first place, and now they're pulling this shit.
Right.
So, yeah. That is the thing. I'd be remiss if I did not mention that.
Well, and it
As a
is
thing.
definitely important that burning of the town and specifically the library and the artifacts and everything there, that was a huge loss of knowledge at the time.
Yeah.
At
The
a time
major
when
example of that.
everything was written down.
Yeah. But anyways, so we get back to the Battle of the Marne. We said the French have finally decided to stop. Battle commences. It's pretty even match on the other armies fighting along the line. The Allied armies manage to move up into this gap almost by accident. They kind of stumble into it. The Germans realize, oh shit, we're about to be taken in the rear. So they have to pull back now. This is the end of the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan has failed.
Yeah, the plan has failed to survive contact with the enemy.
Yeah.
The Germans have been smacked.
The real kick to the balls here is that fight between the German First Army and the French Sixth Army in front of Paris. Given what I told you about the Sixth Army already, the German First Army beats the crap out of it. It
Right.
dissolves. It breaks apart.
Yeah, they roll over them.
General von Kluck, who's the guy in charge of this army, is now basically has
Now, this is the guy that decided he was just going to keep pushing forward, right?
No.
no, not
Or was
Lorenzac,
that over? That was on the other
French
front
side.
with
Yeah.
the French side, yeah.
fort. Sorry.
But von Kluck's this guy. He's in charge of the most important army. He's the one all the way on the right. This is the one that's supposed to go around Paris, and you know,
ended up going to Paris instead.
yeah.
Right.
But now the army in front of him is gone.
So
now
he gets to claim
he
Paris.
He is now like 30 miles away from Paris, with nothing between him and that city. They have to pull back because the other armies are all about to be taken in the rear.
Oh, so no 30 miles to Paris or bust?
All those German soldiers who've been marching, because remember, there are no cars. They walked their asses from the German border
Yeah.
through Belgium into France.
And they literally have an open door in front of them, and they're being told to turn
They
around
finally
and come back.
got there. They're
You
almost
start
within
to-
sight, and they got to
Oh.
turn around.
You start to
Oh.
understand why the Lord of the Rings is 3 books of walking to a place and then just turning around and leaving.
Well, because it's not just walking. It's walking, carrying all that shit, like 70, 80 pounds of shit.
Oh, yeah.
And every day
the One
you're
Ring.
stopping to fight. They stopped issuing rations somewhere around the French border.
All they had was lumbus bread.
Well, fortunately, it was harvest season, so they were able to scavenge successfully. But
they stole potatoes from Potter's farm?
well, I mean, that is standard legal behavior for an army in the field. But
either he's unaware or he's refusing to acknowledge it.
It's fine. Let's move on.
Apparently,
it's funnier this way.
I'm missing a reference, apparently.
Keep moving.
Which one of us is Pippin?
Oh,
I'm totally
okay.
a Mary Doc.
I got it now. I got it. When you mentioned Pippin, I got it.
So we've been there and back again?
Yeah. Okay.
So moving onwards.
Anyways, yeah. So that is referred to as the miracle of the Marne because it actually happens rather quickly. They just stop, fight, and all of a sudden they're going in the other direction.
That is a little depressing for the German soldiers, I have to admit. They had the door wide open, and they're told to turn around and go
There's a lot of reasons
home.
at the end of the war the Germans were pissed and felt like they got spanked, because in a lot of respects,
they did.
And I will say, there are a number of cases. Some of them already happened. We didn't talk about them. Some I will eventually, where one army or the other has a wide open door and does not exploit it. It happens all the frickin' time. I mean, not all it happens a lot.
Yeah.
But, anyways, one thing to note here, this does for Joffre, the French commander, basically what it does for Tannenberg did for Hindenburg.
It turns him into a tactical powerhouse for the army.
He's a popular hero. He's a national hero.
Gotcha.
Which the important thing is, it makes him politically untouchable for quite a while. That's the important thing to remember there. Going on in the future years.
Which meant he had a lot of say in the way the war turned
for
France.
He's in a similar position where he can do whatever the fuck he wants pretty much because nobody can challenge him.
Right.
For political reasons. He will never exercise the same kind of control that Hindenburg and Ludendorff will for reasons of internal politics of the various countries, but yeah, makes him hard to fire. He is now tenured. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Good wording.
Basically, what happens after this is what's known as the race to the sea. Where
Get to the coast as fast as you can.
The Germans will retreat up to the Ain River, dig in, and the French will try to dislodge them, and they won't budge. This is where trench warfare now starts. It's already started on the border.
Now, this is heading them towards the coast by Britain, right?
At the moment, it's just the French. The armies are currently fighting, basically in a straight line. With if Paris is here and the border is over here.
Yeah, I can see both.
They're fighting along that line. The Germans are now being pushed north.
Okay.
They get pushed north to the Ain River, which is about halfway between where they were and the border.
And along the border of Belgium,
right.
So
Now,
there's going to be more fronts opening
that
there.
That flank is still wide open. They still don't have guys way out on the area. So what happens is the race to the sea. Each side will now start trying to take units and get around, going up towards.
They keep trying to loop to the north to find out that the other enemy has looped them to the north. So you send another group to loop to the north, and
they keep running into each other, going boom, 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 boom. In 2 instances, they both launched full-scale offenses in the same spot on the same day, basically the same hour. They just clash right into each other. I think it's twice. And then other times it's just a matter of
reactionary maneuvering, yeah.
Yeah. Culminating in the withdrawal from Antwerp. Eventually that Belgian army will decide, all right, the Germans have finally got around to dealing with us. We have to leave.
Antwerp has a lively history of battles.
Yeah.
Yeah. They decide they've got to leave.
Depending on where you are in Europe, all of it is. It's all old as fuck. So somebody murdered somebody somewhere.
Yeah. And there's a rich history there.
So they decide they're going to leave. The British,
based on supply and demand, if they have so much historic murder, is it really all that valuable anymore? They seem to have a surplus.
I don't know about valuable, but definitely interesting.
So are Pez dispensers. You ever seen the aftermarket on those things?
I don't find Pez that interesting, but, you
Yeah.
know. So they're racing for the sea.
Right. So there's two things happen after that as they get up there. The withdrawal of the Belgian army from Antwerp, because they can't hold out where they are anymore, and they, with the assistance of the British, a small British force, will lift the siege and march down along the coast to take up a position on the end of the line along the coast.
Okay. I would assume
Basically-
at this point we have a line of German Navy versus British Navy as well in the area.
That's going on not in the immediate area. The British Navy is the only one involved. This is too close to the British home waters. The German Navy can't get there.
Okay. So the current Navy line is closer to the German Empire.
There really
than
isn't
it is to...
there isn't a Navy line in the way you would think of on a land battle.
Okay.
Naval shit escalates later.
Okay.
The idea of fleet being, and we will get into that later on. When we talk
Okay,
about the
so
Navy
there
stuff.
are no massive fleet movements at this point.
Yeah.
You also still
Okay,
have to understand
okay.
this is super late into 1914, and this is just the first year. Like this is all quick.
I understand that.
The navies are
I'm
doing
just looking at the map.
the navies are doing stuff. They're basically sideshows at this point.
Okay.
They're basically
Mostly
yeah.
stalemate stuff, holding lines, blah blah.
There are
blah.
some minor engagements. I think the biggest one is the Battle of Hegel and Bright, where I don't think anybody loses anything bigger than a cruiser. Neither side is willing to commit the battleships at this point yet.
Right.
They're too valuable.
They're expensive.
Yeah. They run into that problem. This is why there's only one big naval battle.
You know,
Neither side
in
can
this
risk
time
their shit.
period, in order to build anything really cool, it was expensive. You
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
want to risk losing it.
You see, you say that, but this is when submariners explode.
And we'll get to that when
Yeah.
that time is appropriate.
Yes.
Well, technically, but
Yeah. Anyways, so putting that aside, they march down. They take up a line just inside the Belgian border. So just this little sliver of it's all that's left, right? They get attacked by the Germans, and they're about to break. At which point, King Albert, who is personally leading his army, dude's a great soldier, great commander, great leader, all around one of the A+ guys, World War I, right? This dude's, you want this guy on your team.
yeah.
Kind of pulls his trump card and starts opening sluice gates that hold back the water because in
Flood the place.
Yeah.
because the what they call the Low Countries, Belgium and the Netherlands, are
Is
almost
technically below water line.
either
and-
at or
yeah.
below the water line.
Yeah.
When
They were
They're
marshes
in the
before they.
lowlands.
Yeah, they were marshes before they built the sluice gates.
go
to
out
dry
on
'em out.
go out on a field. You all you got to lift up is about that much dirt. Take a little spade and go like that.
Yep.
The water will start coming up.
Yep.
That's how high the water table is.
Yep.
But yeah, they start blowing and opening a couple of these
It's
sluice
actually
gates.
even worse now with the settling and sinking of the land and raised water levels and everything. But again, that's
Yeah.
another conversation.
So basically, by the end of the day, they do this by the next morning, the area the Germans are where we're at is like waist deep water, a waist deep 5 mile wide lake, and that will basically
that must have been unpleasant to wake up in.
yeah. So the Germans have to pull back, and that will basically take that little piece of front kind of out of the war for the most part.
Yeah,
because
you
it's a
can't
lake.
fight through water.
Yeah,
it
it's
doesn't
basically
work
a
so
lake.
well.
Yeah. That means the last major engagement is going to happen below that, where the British force is. Because it's basically the French army is this big long line with a little British force at the end and another little Belgian force on the end of
Okay,
that.
yeah, no, it looks like the German army is kind of U-shaping Berlin, Belgium right now.
It's
If they're kind of at the borders and fighting with them, are they between France and Belgium? Have they
Basically-
taken enough Belgium to hold
almost
that line?
all of Belgium is occupied at this point. There's just
Oh,
a
okay.
tiny little sliver. that is
Okay, so Belgium is essentially conquered by Germany at this point.
almost all of it.
Okay.
They're only
gotcha.
holding on to a little bit of it.
Gotcha. So the front is mostly on the line of France, and everything behind that is either
It's well within, like, it's mostly on the border with
or
Germany.
the Netherlands.
On the border with Germany, it then turns, goes pretty much east-west so that it's going into France, goes up before you get to Paris again, and then heads for the English Channel coast, cutting just through Belgium.
Okay. Okay,
like
I gotcha.
parallel to the Belgian border, but just inside of it.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So the last engagement on the front for 1914 happens at a place called Ypres.
Yeep.
Ypres.
Yeep.
The first Battle of Ypres. There will be 3 battles of Ypres over the course of the war.
It's just a hilarious name. I'm sure it has a long and storied history and a reason, but that's just a funny name.
Yeah.
Ypres.
Battles of
You're
Ypres,
being
not so funny.
tremendously disrespectful to the locals.
And I do apologize for that.
No, you don't. You're an American.
It's a funny phonetic sound.
A lot of serious fighting will happen around Ypres. The battles of Ypres are some of the worst, bloodiest war battles that they'll fight at the war. Either of you heard
In
of
a war that had a lot of them.
Either of you heard of Passchendaele?
No.
Not familiar.
All right, that's mostly a British thing. That is one of the most infamous battles of the war, and it's essentially a secondary fight of the Third Battle of Ypres.
Okay, well, the
but
first
that's later on.
Battle of Ypres.
First Battle of Ypres.
Let's discuss that today.
Ultimately, the end game of it is it's more stalemate. The British hold on to Ypres. The Germans fail to take it, and that's the end of the front. A couple little things I want to mention on it, because we've talked about this in the generic, and I want to mention a couple of specific examples. There's a couple instances where the Germans units will break through the British line. At a certain point in the Battle of Ypres, the British Expeditionary Force is almost completely annihilated. They lose. They take like almost, I think, in some units, like 90% casualties.
Wow.
Of the British original army is either dead, captured, or injured.
World War I is tremendously bloody, and don't talk about it.
It gets pummeled bad to the point where if the Germans had known what was going on and where it was going on, and it had the wherewithal, they could have pushed right through it. But they don't.
Well, it sounds like a lot of the reason that this war propagated the way it did was just lack of information on all sides.
Yeah.
Everyone was working in the dark.
As far as like the casualties, I'll mention overall, I mean there are exceptions to this, but overall, especially in 1914, the Germans will tend to take less casualties than the British and the French. This is mostly for 2 reasons. Number one, they tend to be on the defensive through most of the war. And
Usually works out better.
trench warfare favors the defensive. Also, they had a better understanding and an understanding earlier on of the nature of the fight that they're getting into, and they adapt quicker.
They're exceptionally well trained for the gear.
The
they
Battle
have.
of Ypres where trench warfare was first used?
It starts mostly along the border with Germany, because that's where the fighting stops.
Trench warfare is kind of everywhere. It starts from developing embedded defensive positions and then having to expand them and link them.
Basically,
Okay.
any point on the battlefield, and it doesn't happen like all at once, it happens at different points on the battlefield as they shut down.
Well, as it's needed, they'll dig new lines.
As the armies
right.
as armies meet and can't go anywhere because there's armies on either side of them.
They entrench themselves.
They can't move.
They
so
dig
they
in.
entrench and dig in.
That's
and-
where that phrase comes from.
And basically what happens is it rolls up the line, going from the Swiss border and then on the Ain River, and then as they race to the sea, boom, together, nothing happens, entrench. Go around, entrench. Around, entrench, until they get up to Ypres, and there's no more room to move.
Right,
It's
because
one
the
long
lake
line.
they flooded in up there.
It's now one long line, the
Line
whole
of
front.
trenches.
No one has any room to maneuver on anywhere else. Everybody's now entrenched.
Okay.
But the one thing I want to mention with Ypres is 2 instances. This happened twice
Now,
at the Battle of Ypres,
sorry, continue.
where the Germans got through because the British are falling apart. They have a clear open shot. The British will scramble to throw something, anything, out there. So like officers will round up like clerks, cooks, just anybody. A force of a couple hundred against a force of 10,000 or whatever, and put them out there to try to hold them off. The Germans will outthink themselves, thinking because we've already destroyed the main British force, these guys must be the British reserves that we haven't seen enter the fight yet. This must be the start of the big British reserve coming, so we need to get the hell out of here. And they get scared off by a group of a few guys who aren't even combat soldiers. That happens twice just at the Battle of Ypres.
Now, Battle of Ypres is in December, yes. Was this the one that on December 25th?
Hold on one second. The Battle of Ypres is... Hold on one second. Let me give you the exact date here. Ypres is October 19th through November 30th.
Ah, okay. Because there's that story about, and I don't know if it's this
Talking about
year.
the Christmas truce?
Yeah, the Christmas truce. Is that
That's-
this year or is that?
That will be this year at Christmas when we get through actual Christmas.
Okay. We are still in October, November.
Yeah, we're still in October, November. This will be the end of the major.
Harder?
No, we're basically there.
Okay.
This is basically the end of the major on-land fighting. There will always be fighting even when there's no major offensive, raids and capturing prisoners.
There's
and all that.
always little skerfuffles that come
People
up.
find out that people are always dying. There's
Right.
never a period where people are not dying on a trench line. But like we said, the Christmas truce will happen during the peace where the Germans start singing Christmas songs. The British and the French kind of respond. Everybody starts popping up their head a little. They go out into the field, play soccer, exchange goods.
Football.
I believe
They
there
pronounce
was.
it football.
I believe there was
Football.
alcohol traded between the commanders of the area.
The two top officers, I believe,
Yeah.
what they actually exchanged. The British officer, I believe it was, got a German dress military hat, and the German got a British dress military knife.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
I know a knife got exchanged. I'm just not positive. I believe
Yeah.
it was a hat.
I
and a knife.
remember that
Honestly,
there
cool
was
little
a
trinkets.
I remember the whole Christmas truce thing, and
Yeah.
that there was a
There's
lot
movies
of
about it.
Oh, yeah.
there was a lot of
Yeah.
interchanging between the two sides of no, it's fucking Christmas. I don't have much, but here
Yeah,
I have some of
yeah.
this rot gut we've been making.
and a brutal understanding of tomorrow I'm gonna kill you.
But tonight
Yeah.
we drink and celebrate,
Yeah,
and hope you're more hungover than I am.
yeah, and then that lasted for a day, and then after that, the generals all made sure that it didn't happen again.
Yeah.
Made it abundantly clear: anybody tries to start that shit, you get shot.
Yeah. Well, and it was still early enough in the war for it to work.
Yeah. And
The real hurts hadn't really happened.
like there
yet.
will be other like similar truces and sort of types of things like that later on down the line, but they're coordinated and organized and more structured. Like a lot of times, one thing, just as I'm thinking about it, Germany's army initially starts out as multiple armies. There's like 4 of them. Each of the major constituent countries of Germany has its own thing, and then they all merge in wartime.
Right. Kind of like city-state
Yeah.
armies that, when needed, would band together.
Or
for
state
the,
militias during the Civil War, right?
Right.
How state
That's
regiments,
a better
yeah.
way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Prussian army, the Prussians had a reputation for being particularly brutal, or
Right.
just very matter of fact of, no, you're the enemy, we're going to shoot your ass as much as we can.
You are going down.
Where some of the other ones were a little more, like, until we get orders, we're going to leave you alone, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So, like, the
The
Sax-
Prussians were very gung-ho about
like,
it.
I know there's at least one story of where, like, the Saxon troops, if they knew they were getting replaced by Prussian troops, they'd actually, I forget how they do it, but they would actually kind of send a message to the Allied troops on the other side of, brace yourselves, the badasses are showing
The
up.
Prussians are coming. The,
The
Prussians are coming.
Yeah, get ready. They're not going to just sit here and wait for orders. They're going to start bombing your ass. So you got things like that happen, or
Okay.
truces to go out and clean up the dead, which is par for the
Well,
course for war
that's
for back then.
standard for wartime.
Yeah, but so warfare on the land basically comes to an end. There are a couple little side areas we'll mention just because they're a thing. We
Well,
mentioned the
number
Navy
one,
stuff.
the weather.
I mean theaters.
Oh, yeah.
The Navy stuff.
Although winter in that area must have been pretty damn harsh and must have squashed a fair amount of active warfare.
Yeah, generally armies don't fight during winter.
Yeah.
That's just always been a thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, the naval stuff. We mentioned the naval stuff. For the most part, the big ships stay out of it. There's one decent-sized engagement, the Battle of Hegel and Bright, which happens off the coast of Germany. The British technically win. Both sides lose some cruisers. The British technically lose a little less.
If I recall, though, that's the battle that proves the effectiveness of the U-boat as a coastal defense.
I'm not sure.
The majority of
I don't know the
U-boat-
details of Hilo and
the
Bright.
thing
So.
that people don't actually realize, the majority of U-boat kills at this point were actually on the surface. It was
Oh, yeah.
basically they'd pop up in the middle of nowhere with a gun emplacement that could punch through an enemy ship's hull, and then they
Okay.
could just go back under. And at this point, there's no way to track under the water.
So, okay.
Yeah.
At this point,
Also, only about a quarter of German U-boats, even by the end of the war, were the big oceanic ones you're thinking
Yeah.
of. The vast majority were these really small, piddly things that were used for
well, I
Oh,
want
yeah.
to say the
harbor
original
defense.
U-boats were essentially just Coast Guard, like coast hoppers.
I mean, more or less.
Yeah.
They were reasonably small, heavily armed but lightly manned.
Yeah, the German military brass actually didn't like the idea of the U-boats, but Kaiser Wilhelm, our old buddy,
Yep.
was like, "You will fucking fund the U-boats. I rode in one. That shit is awesome."
And initially they didn't use them as commerce raiders. The first U-boat attacks were actually against British ships
Okay.
until the British managed to defend their ports
There's
well enough.
definitely something to be said about a smaller but more populous, highly
Effective.
These are
and highly mobile,
This
because
is an
these things
air-
are faster than most of the
No, they're not.
not in
No?
this era.
Oh, okay.
No, subs are actually really unwieldy and kind of stupid, and like 99% a death trap.
Early subs and World War II subs even are different.
That's
Yeah.
right. I'm thinking of the newer stuff
I
that were
think-
Yeah,
more
no, these things
mobile.
are run like on a diesel kerosene mix and are smoky and awful
Yeah.
inside.
That's right.
They had physical snorkels that they had to always keep above water.
Some did, yes. Not all,
Gotcha.
but some
Well,
definitely
they
did.
eventually got rid of it, but early on they had to.
And there was always at least one guy smoking a stogie.
and the torpedoes never.
Well, it's good for your T-zone.
The torpedoes didn't always work right. They
At this
prefer to
point
use
in
their
time-
guns.
At this point in time, torpedoes were fired from the surface. Underwater torpedoes were not invented yet. They
Yeah.
were still
Okay.
using conventional
So they still had to
torpedoes.
surface in order
Yeah.
to
Well,
launch
they
anything.
actually
Almost all of the early kills are surface.
Well,
Simply because
okay.
there's
Well, because-
almost nothing you can do under the
because of the
water.
unreliability of the torpedoes, they actually prefer to use their guns. Especially when they started attacking commerce ships, they prefer to use their guns,
Yeah.
but rather than the torpedoes.
You know, a fun sidebar. This is also the first time in human history where merchant vessels were in waters that were considered safe enough that they weren't armed just of their own fucking volition.
Nice.
This was a
Yeah.
new historical trend.
Yeah, but 1914, they haven't really started the full commerce raid thing as a tactic. There is some, but it's more. They're kind of feeling it out. Does it work better against the military? Better against this? It's kind of
Yeah.
sporadic.
Okay.
So you had that. You had Hegel and Bright, which is the only real battle, and then you had what I call I guess you call it the flight of the cruisers, because Germany has colonies. There were boats stationed into those colonies. A lot of cruiser level vessels on down.
Yeah, that kind of spreads your navy all over the
Yeah,
place.
but when war is declared, these guys are all stuck out there, right? They can't get back into their home waters because of the British Navy. So what they do, there's two stories of the Emden, which basically, for quite a while, actually
well, and
goes
I'm
around-
sure the British Navy enforced a blockade to keep
Yeah.
those.
Well, no, these guys are out,
Ships
out,
from
out in
coming
the open.
back.
Yeah, well, but so what they do is they go around raiding, commerce raiding. The Emden does a pretty good job in the Indian Ocean before it gets captured.
They
I
turn
think.
pirate.
Well, no, it's raiding commerce is a legit thing in this era, but
It's a strategy.
same thing the U-boats are doing, just above
Yeah,
water.
yeah. No, I get you.
Well, most of the U-boats are doing it above water too.
You know what I mean, though.
yeah.
It's yeah.
Okay, so
They're-
they
but
go
the
on
other-
raiding
These are more
runs.
these are more Booten than Undersea at this point.
The big story, famous story, is the German East Africa or East Asia Squadron, which is an actual, isn't just one ship; it's a whole collection.
Yeah,
of
you said squadron.
fleet.
So
stationed. I think they were stationed out of the German colony in China. Which, when the Japanese declare war, they take over most of Germany's Pacific colonies, except for the ones further down south, which Australia takes.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how that breaks down. They end up shooting Germans the first time around, partnering with them the second.
Same thing with the Italians.
Oh, I know. It's all a big shit show. None of this is good.
Well, I mean, historically, countries didn't have long-running alliances. They flip-flopped all the fucking time, depending on what their interest at the moment was.
definitely.
No, I realize the stability of the last 100 years is basically predicated on thousands of years of warfare beforehand.
Yeah.
I understand this is us bucking a rather ugly trend.
Yeah.
That being said, while there's much more to say, I think that pretty much wraps up
No,
1914.
I
Or
got
do you have
couple
more?
couple more points. Small points. We mentioned that like the East Asian Squadron. That's famous because they actually kept their asses alive a long friggin' time. I don't think they lasted out the year, but eventually there's a battle off the coast of the Falklands that's fairly famous, and they got sunk. I think they all went down, but that's basically all the Navy stuff that happens. The land war, Germany had African colonies. Most of those they got taken over right away because they didn't have the guys there to deal with it. The British surrounded them. The only one worth noting is in Germany, East Africa, the guy in charge there, his name is Paul von Little-Vorbeck. By the end of 1914, that guy's still fighting. He starts trying to fight almost like a guerrilla war. That guy will come back up later down the line.
Okay.
So I mention him now. We will hear about him later on.
Okay.
Other than that, those are all quick little flash in the pans. I don't think any of them. Some of them they didn't even suffer casualties. They got taken over so quickly.
They just surrendered.
I mentioned that they
it
happened
was
to say
done.
that they happened. That's it.
Yeah.
We won't hear anything else from the Pacific or Africa except for Mr. Paul von Little.
Okay.
But
there wasn't a lot of action down
yeah,
there.
that's done. It's over. 1914. It's done. It's over. The only other thing that hasn't happened yet that we haven't talked about is the Ottomans, the Turks.
Ah, yes. What was happening with the empire
Now,
down
the
there?
Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, however you want to refer to them.
It was at the time the Ottoman Empire.
Although people called them the Turks, you went back and forth with the nomenclature.
My only question is, why the fuck did Constantinople get the works?
That's nobody's business but the Turks, man.
Ba-da-ba-dap, ba-da-ba-dap-bop-bop, ba-da-ba-dap, ba-da-ba-dap-bop-bop.
I guess we couldn't talk about the Ottoman Empire without one
No, it
Istanbul
wasn't
is Constantinople
possible.
reference.
Is it my fault if even old New York was once New Amsterdam? Why'd they change it? I can't say.
Guess I like it better that way. Anyways,
Damn straight.
prior to this point, the Ottomans have already been kind of getting close to the Germans, just for economic reasons. The Germans are building a Berlin to Baghdad railway,
Okay.
major economic development, right? They've been training their army and shit.
Yeah. So they come in on Germany's
So
side.
they're leaning that way, but they're kind of like, eh. They've also been getting their ass kicked for the past 5 years.
Right.
So they're kind of wary of.
Their reach has been shrinking for the last several
Yeah.
decades.
But what happens is there is in the Mediterranean, there is the two German ships called the. It's
Microphone.
why am I not finding this? There it is. The Goeben and the Breslau. There are two German cruisers in the Mediterranean.
Goeben and the Breslau?
Goeben and the Breslau.
Okay.
I forget what Goeben is, but Breslau is a city, I believe. They're in the Mediterranean when the war breaks out, and they're basically running their asses off trying to get away from the British Navy. And that's a whole story in and of itself. I'm pretty sure there's probably at least one movie made about that story.
Probably.
Yeah, there's movies
And
about
they
everything.
managed to sneak away from the British Navy on a number of occasions, and they make their way to because they're basically trapped in there. The British control both outlets to Constantinople, right?
Not
And
Istanbul?
technically, the Turks were already calling it Istanbul. But are we in a hurry to finish this?
Istanbul.
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 Istanbul. Okay. Do we have it on our systems now?
No.
No
never.
promises.
All right.
That song's never not going to be catchy, so no.
So these two ships, they get there. They go through the Dardanelles and the Sea of Marmara and the Bosphorus, which is the little waterway, leads to Constantinople. Right? The Turks now have a decision to make. The British obviously want them to either hand over those ships or let them in to
stand down. Yeah.
to deal with them. They have to pick it. At this point, they got to kind of pick. So ultimately, they're going to pick to shut the British and the Allies out of the straits, which now means the Russians are fucked because that's where most of their trade and commerce comes through, is through that waterway from the Black Sea. Also, kind of influencing the decision is I believe in October or November. Let's see. I'll give you the date. This is actually earlier on. On July 29th, way back on July 29th, because the British know the Ottomans are kind of chummy with the Germans, Winston Churchill gives an order for a couple of Ottoman Navy vessels that are being built by the British. The Ottomans are paying them to
stop building them?
To seize them.
Oh.
They actually have Ottoman
take them.
personnel on them or whatever, but to take them over.
Okay.
And Churchill, being Churchill, does this in the most non-discreet way possible.
Of course.
So the Ottomans are already a little peeved at the British because of this. Right? The Gobin of Breslau, that happens from July 28th when war is declared to August 10th. They end up in Constantinople. They kind of sit there, and the Germans, as an enticement, say, you know what? Those two ships, they're now yours. They're now Ottoman ships.
We'll give them back to you.
Well, not back to you. These are the German ships, not the Ottoman British ships.
Gotcha.
The Germans say, our ships are there. You're protecting them. They're now yours. Well, you give them Turkish names, have all the German crew members start wearing fezzes.
Yep.
Those are the most fashionable.
And fly
Germans
Ottoman
ever.
flags, and now they're officially Ottoman ships. They're still crewed by the Germans and run by the Germans, but they're flying an Ottoman flag.
It's a gift to the Ottomans.
How much strudel is included in the rations now? This is important for morale.
Oh, I'm sure the best strudel. I'm sure the best of strudel.
I get the feeling if it's the Ottomans, they're just going to send baklava and be like, what's the difference? It's the same.
Anyways,
Pour curry on everything.
Then
Baklava.
the Germans get tired of the Ottomans trying to make up their mind. So what they do is they order the guys who are in charge of the Gobin of the Breslau, who are technically working for the Ottomans, but they're still German sailors, to go out into the Black Sea, find a Russian port, coastal port, and start shelling it. They do this.
Attack the Russians.
It's a disposable asset that wasn't part of your war chest in the first fucking place.
Well, no. It's the Germans using their ships that are now technically supposed to belong to the Ottomans, flying an Ottoman flag,
getting
shooting
orders
at the
from
Russians.
the Ottomans.
So no, it's just a false flag then.
Yeah.
It's a false flag ordered by people who aren't the people who are actually whose flag it is. So
wonderful.
Yeah, they attack Odessa, Sevastopol, and I think one or two other ports. The Russians then are obviously a little pissed off about that. The Ottomans try and say, it was the Germans, not us. We didn't know they were going to do that. We told them not to, and they did it anyways. At which point the Russians say, okay, fine, hand them over. We can't do that?
We're using them right now.
War declared!
I kind of really like those boats.
Yeah, and then on, November 1st, Russia declares war, followed by the British and the French shortly thereafter.
They're really nice boats. Sorry, man.
Yeah. And that is basically the last big event of 1914.
They go undersea. Did you know?
Oh, were they submarines?
No, they're cruisers.
Oh,
yeah, okay. I thought they were cruisers.
My mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. The only one last thing I will say at this point, now that all this has happened, the armies have entrenched for the winter, everybody's plans have gone to shit.
You can say that again.
Which leads into 1915 with everyone's got the same question. Now what? We all had our plans. They all went to shit. We didn't expect the death toll to be this high. We didn't expect the trenches to show up. We expected something totally different. What the fuck do we do now?
Yeah. A lot of corpses. Really, just a
and that's where we'll start with 1915, is the question of now what?
Bodies.
Well, this has
much
been a hell of a ride, and it's got a hell of a long way to go. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This has been Informed and Confused. Check us out on Twitter
At infoconfused@twitter.com.
I'm Ben.
I'm Alan.
I'm Nick.
Bye.
There's a little garage on a small town street. I like to meet my friends there every week, and I know we'll talk about some facts and things, history and science and some crazy shit. Talking it out with Alan, Ben, and Nick, and I know that it's gonna be a weird-ass show. Ooh, insanity abounds. Ooh, the world is spinning round. Now we're gonna break it down.